The roar of the C-47 Dakota's engines was a physical vibration that shook through the bones of every man in the stick. Outside the open jump door, the night was absolute, a void of black occasionally torn by brilliant, terrifying flashes of orange and white from the German anti-aircraft guns below. It was 1:30 a.m. on June 6, 1944. For Private First Class John Jack R. Thompson of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 82nd Airborne Division, this was the moment. The green light flickered on. "Go, go, go!" The jumpmaster screamed, his voice barely audible over the engine roar and the deafening crump, crump, crump of the 88mm flak shells exploding around them. Thompson, his M1 Garand rifle secured tightly to his chest with a specially designed Griswold bag, was fourth in line. He shuffled forward, hooked his static line to the cable, and without hesitation, threw himself into the howling darkness. The slipstream snatched him. A brutal, chaotic force that tumbled him for a moment before the opening shock of his main chute slammed into his harness with a force that stole his breath. For a few seconds, there was a surreal, swinging silence, punctuated only by the distant thunder of the naval bombardment. Then, the tracers started coming up. Lazy. Graceful arcs of red and green light began to float upwards from the French countryside. They didn't look dangerous until they started speeding up, ripping past his canopy with an evil hiss. He could hear the sharp crack of small arms fire now. 2. The Germans knew they were here. He pulled on his risers, trying to slip away from the streams of fire, but he was a slow-moving target in a sky full of death. His training screamed at him to prepare for a proper parachute landing fall, PLF, but the ground, when it came, was not a nice, open field. It was a nightmare. He slammed sideways into the gnarled, unforgiving branches of a tree in a Norman hedgerow. The bocage. The impact knocked the wind out of him. His canopy snagged, leaving him dangling 10 feet above the ground, swinging like a pendulum in the dark. He was alone. The carefully planned stick of paratroopers was scattered to the winds. The orderly assembly plan was a joke. All around him, he could hear the sounds of a scattered battle, the distinctive ping of a Garand's unblocked clip ejecting, the staccato rattle of a German MG42 shouts in English and German, and the screams of wounded men. He was behind enemy lines, isolated and trapped in a tree. The first order of business was to get down and find someone, anyone, from his unit. He fumbled for his jump knife, sawing frantically at the suspension lines. The tough canvas straps finally gave way, and he dropped the remaining distance, hitting the soft, damp earth with a jarring thud. He lay still for a moment, listening. The sounds of fighting seemed to be coming from every direction. He had no idea where he was. The detailed silk maps and tiny compasses they'd been issued were useless if you didn't know your starting point. He crawled to the base of the hedgerow, a massive, ancient earthen berm crowned with thick, tangled roots and trees. It was a natural fortification, and the Germans knew it. He could hear guttural German voices on the other side. He was disoriented, but he knew one thing for certain: he was deep in enemy territory, and his war was about to start. He checked his Garand. It was caked in mud from his landing. He pulled the Griswold bag off the weapon, his mind already working on the problem of survival. He was one man, alone, in the dark, with an entire German army between him and his objectives. The trick with the parachute rifle, a clever piece of equipment, was about to become the least of his innovations. To survive the night, he would have to become a ghost, a sniper, and a saboteur all rolled into one. crouched in the inky blackness at the base of the hedgerow. Jack Thompson became a creature of pure instinct. The German voices on the other side of the earthen wall were close, maybe 15 yards away. They sounded calm, conversational even, unaware of the American parasite clinging to the other side of their defensive line. His training had emphasized speed and aggression, link up, assemble, and accomplish the mission. But alone, with a muddy rifle and no idea of the bigger picture, a new strategy was forced upon him. Silence and observation. He began to move, not over the hedgerow, but along its base. He moved with a painstaking slowness that made each minute feel like an hour, placing each foot with deliberate care to avoid snapping a single twig. The cacophony of battle was his cover, the distant crump of mortars, the sporadic machine gun duels. He was a shadow flitting between darker shadows. After 50 yards, the hedgerow intersected another at a right angle, forming a perfect L. Peering cautiously around the corner, he saw the source of the voices. A German machine gun nest was dug in at the junction, perfectly positioned to cover the sunken lane that ran between the two hedgerows. An MG42 was set up on its bipod, its crew of 3 visible in the occasional muzzle flash from their own weapon as they fired at unseen targets down the lane. A 4th soldier, an officer or an NCO by the look of his posture, was standing slightly behind them, directing fire. Thompson's initial impulse was to throw a grenade, but he had no grenades. His only grenades had been lost when he cut himself out of his harness. It was him and his Garand. A single shot would reveal his position, and he'd be hunted down and killed in this maze of green walls. He was about to slip away when he noticed something. The German MG team was firing in long, sweeping bursts. The deafening roar of the Hitler's buzzsaw was so overwhelming that it created a bubble of auditory isolation. The loader was feeding belts, the gunner was focused on his arc of fire, and the commander was shouting instructions directly into the gunner's ear. An idea, cold and ruthless, began to form. It wasn't about fair fights. It was about survival and attrition. He sank back into the darkness, finding a small fold in the earth where the roots of the hedgerow protruded. It wasn't a foxhole, but it broke up his silhouette. He used the blade of his jump knife to carefully clear a small, unobstructed view of the machine gun nest. He then used a handful of damp soil to pack a small, stable rest for the forestock of his Garand. He was making a sniper's nest. He took a deep, slow breath, forcing his heart rate down. He was no trained sniper. He was a paratrooper, taught to shoot fast and move faster. But he was also a farm kid from Kentucky, who'd been hunting white-tailed deer since he was old enough to hold a .22. He understood patience. He understood wind, though there was little tonight. And he understood the importance of the first shot. He didn't aim for the gunner. The gunner was a replaceable part. He aimed for the commander. The man was the brain. He was standing, a slightly taller, clearer target. Thompson lined up the sights, the pale, glowing dots of the Garand's front and rear sights settling on the center of the German's chest. He exhaled slowly, and as his lungs emptied, he squeezed the trigger. The crack of the .30-06 cartridge was sharp and loud, but it was utterly swallowed by the ripping cloth roar of the MG42. The German commander jerked backward and crumpled without a sound. The MG42 crew didn't even notice. The gunner kept firing. The loader kept feeding. They were deafened by their own weapon. Thompson worked the Garand's bolt almost automatically. The empty en-bloc clip pinged out. A sound he prayed was lost in the din. He loaded a fresh 8-round clip from his bandolier, the movement smooth and practiced. He shifted his aim slightly. The loader was now the most exposed. Another slow squeeze. Another sharp crack lost in the machine gun's fury. The loader slumped over the ammunition box. Now, the gunner noticed, the firing stopped. In the sudden, relative silence, the gunner turned, confused, to see his two comrades dead. "Was it?" he began to say. Thompson's third shot cut him off, striking him in the side of the head. In less than 10 seconds, a four-man German position had been wiped out. They had died without ever knowing they were under attack from a new direction. Thompson didn't move. He waited, watching. 5 minutes passed, then 10. No one came to investigate. To any other Germans in the area, the MG42 had simply stopped firing. It could have been a jam. It could have been a crew change. In the chaos of the night, its silence was just another data point. Thompson finally moved, slithering forward like a snake through the wet grass. He reached the machine gun nest. He quickly scavenged what he could, a Luger pistol from the dead officer, a few stick grenades, and most importantly, several boxes of MG42 ammunition. He couldn't use the MG42 itself. It was too heavy and conspicuous, but he had a new plan. He faded back into the bocage, leaving the silent gun pit behind him. He was no longer just a lost paratrooper. He was a predator, and the hedgerows of Normandy were his hunting ground. The first 3 of his 30 were down. The Luger was a heavy, alien weight in Thompson's web belt. The German stick grenades' potato mashers felt clumsy compared to the American MK2 pineapples he'd trained with, but they were tools, and in his new role as a lone hunter, any tool was valuable. He moved away from the scene of the ambush, his senses stretched to their absolute limit. The adrenaline was still coursing through him, but a cold, calculating focus had settled over it. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was conducting a private war. His new strategy was born from necessity and opportunity. The German defenses were strong at the strong points, the crossroads, the villages, the chateaus. But the spaces in between, the thousands of small fields and lanes enclosed by these ancient hedgerows, were a no-man's land of confusion. It was in these gaps that small groups of Germans moved messengers, ammunition carriers, patrols sent to probe the scattered American positions. These were his targets. He found a perfect spot about 200 yards from the now silent machine gun nest. It was where 2 sunken lanes intersected, a natural choke point. A lone, gnarled oak tree at the corner of one hedgerow offered a climbing vantage point. He scaled it carefully, finding a thick, horizontal branch that gave him a clear view of the intersection below. He settled in, making himself as small as possible against the trunk. This was his new office. He didn't have to wait long. The sound of booted feet, marching in a steady, unhurried rhythm, echoed up one of the lanes. A German patrol, 5 men, led by a corporal. They were moving with the confidence of men who believed they were behind their own lines. They were heading directly for his intersection, likely on their way to find out why the MG42 had gone silent. Thompson's mind raced. 5 men. He had 8 rounds in the Garand. He couldn't afford a prolonged firefight. He needed to break them, psychologically, before they could even react. He looked at the potato masher grenade in his hand. The long wooden handle gave it a much longer throwing range than an American grenade. An idea clicked into place. As the patrol entered the intersection, he didn't throw the grenade at them. Instead, he lobbed it high in an arc, over their heads, to land on the road behind them. The fuse hissed. The Germans heard it, turning in confusion just as it detonated with a concussive crump. Dirt and shrapnel sprayed the lane behind them. They were now cut off from retreat, their attention focused backward, in that split second of disorientation. Thompson fired. He didn't aim for center mass. He aimed for the leader, the corporal. A single shot to the chest. The man dropped. The other 4 Germans spun around, now facing the direction of the gunshot, their backs to the exploding grenade. They were perfectly silhouetted and utterly confused. Ping. Thompson worked the Garand. He fired twice more in rapid succession. 2 more Germans fell. The remaining 2, now realizing the depth of the trap, broke. 1 scrambled for the cover of the opposite hedgerow. Thompson's 4th shot caught him in the back as he ran. The last man, a young private, threw down his rifle and raised his hands, screaming, "Kamerad, Kamerad." Thompson didn't fire. He watched from his perch. The boy stood there, trembling, for a full minute. Then, seeing no one emerge, he turned and fled back down the lane, disappearing into the darkness. Thompson let him go. A lone, unarmed, terrified soldier spreading panic was more useful to him than a dead one. He climbed down from the tree, his legs stiff. He quickly searched the bodies, taking more ammunition, another Luger, and a map case from the corporal. He didn't linger. The shots and the grenade would draw attention. He melted back into the bocage, a phantom that had struck and vanished. He had turned a German patrol into a weapon of psychological warfare. The count was now 8. He repeated this tactic twice more over the next hour. He found another choke point near a small stone bridge. He used a single, well-placed shot to kill the driver of a horse-drawn cart carrying ammunition, causing chaos and blocking the bridge. As a squad of Germans fanned out to find the shooter, he used 2 more grenades, thrown to create the illusion of a larger force, and picked off 3 more soldiers with precise rifle fire before fading away. He was no longer just shooting Germans. He was orchestrating their fears, using the terrain and their own expectations against them. The darkness and the impenetrable bocage made every shadow a potential enemy, every distant rifle crack a threat. He was becoming a legend in their minds, a ghost that killed without warning. The count climbed to 14. The first hints of dawn were a faint, gray smear in the eastern sky, turning the absolute black of night into a world of murky shadows. For Jack Thompson, this was a critical shift. The darkness that had been his greatest ally was receding. He could no longer move with the same impunity. The scattered, close-quarters ambushes of the night would become suicide in the daylight. He needed a new plan, a position of strength that would allow him to control a large area without being seen. The map he'd taken from the German corporal was crude, but it showed a key feature, a small, stone farmhouse marked as Widerstandsnest, Resistance Nest, overlooking a main road leading towards the village of Sainte-Mère-Église. It was a logical strong point, and it was almost certainly occupied. Most men would have given it a wide berth. Thompson saw it as an opportunity. The Germans there would be looking outwards, expecting an attack from the fields or the road. They would not be looking behind them, at the dense bocage that crept up to the very edge of the farm's courtyard. It took him an hour of painstaking movement to circle the position. He moved through the thickest parts of the hedgerows, sometimes crawling on his belly through drainage ditches filled with cold, stagnant water. The sound of German voices and the smell of coffee and tobacco smoke grew stronger. He finally found his spot, the rotting, moss-covered loft of a small barn that stood 50 yards behind the main farmhouse. A small, missing shingle provided a perfect loophole, with a commanding view of the farm's courtyard and the rear windows of the house itself. He settled in, arranging a pile of old, musty hay to break up his outline. He had a clear field of fire. In the courtyard, he could see a German squad brewing coffee around a small fire. An NCO was smoking a cigarette, leaning against the Kubelwagen. In the house, he could see shadows moving past the windows. It was a target-rich environment, but a single shot would bring the entire force down on him. He needed to change the equation. Then he saw it. Propped against the wall of the barn, just below his loft, was an MG42 left there by a crew who had likely gone into the house for a break. It was set up on its tripod, with a 50-round drum magazine attached. A plan, audacious and incredibly dangerous, formed in his mind. He wouldn't just snipe. He would create a massacre. He waited until the NCO in the courtyard finished his cigarette and walked towards the outhouse located between the barn and the main house. It was the perfect trigger. As the man disappeared inside, Thompson took a deep breath. This was the point of no return. He shifted from his Garand to the German machine gun. He'd never fired an MG42 before, but the principle was the same. He swung the barrel, aiming not at the soldiers, but at the main farmhouse. He focused on the windows. He depressed the trigger. The sound was cataclysmic, a ripping, tearing roar that shattered the morning calm. The high rate of fire, over 200 rounds per minute, was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. The weapon bucked in his hands, a living, furious beast. He walked the torrent of 7.90 millimeters fire across the back of the farmhouse, shattering windows, chewing the stone facade to dust, and sending slivers of wood and glass flying inward. He couldn't see the results, but he could hear the screams from inside. He was hosing down the entire structure, turning it into a death trap. After a 5-second burst, he immediately swung the MG42 to the courtyard. The Germans there were frozen in shock, staring at their own weapon that was now killing them. He fired another long burst, the rounds kicking up fountains of dirt and stone, cutting down 3 men where they stood. The rest scrambled for cover. He didn't wait. He dropped the MG42, its barrel smoking, white-hot. He snatched up his Garand. The Germans in the courtyard were now pinned and confused. Believing they were under assault from a large force, they were firing wildly, but not at his barn. They were shooting at the hedgerows, at imagined attackers. This was his moment. He became a machine himself. He identified targets with a cold, detached efficiency. A helmet peeking over a water trough. Crack, 1. A soldier trying to run for the Kubelwagen. Crack, 2. Ping, reload. A German firing from a window, his silhouette clear against the light inside. Crack, 3. He was a metronome of death, each shot a perfectly timed beat. The Germans were disorganized, leaderless, and trapped between a devastating machine gun they thought was in enemy hands and a sniper they couldn't locate. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes. When the last German in the courtyard fell and the fire from the farmhouse had been silenced, an eerie quiet returned, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the crackle of the still burning fire. Thompson didn't move from his spot for a long time, watching, waiting for any sign of movement. There was none. He had single-handedly annihilated a reinforced German squad. He counted at least 10 bodies in the courtyard. Combined with the carnage he had inflicted through the farmhouse windows, his tally for this one engagement had to be over 15. He had started the night with a trick to keep his rifle clean. He was ending the dawn as a one-man army, having used the enemy's own deadliest weapon against them. The count was now well over 30. The ghost in the bocage had just proven he could unleash a storm as well.